What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Monday edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, where we talk about injuries and the waiver wire and everything important that happened on Sunday from both of those perspectives. And as I am every week, I am joined to talk about all this stuff with Tucker Bagley. How are you doing, Tucker?
I'm doing great, Ray. Just a normal 75-degree day in New Jersey in November. So just a beautiful day. I'm sure me and you probably are having similar weather. You in Texas, me in Jersey. Similar
I think
climate.
I think we're in the 90s at this point now.
Oh, lovely.
It's going great. Yeah, it's really going well. We got a hint of cooler weather. To be fair, the actual cool version of Central Texas is not until, later in, January, February, things like that. But we did get like a hint of cooler weather. I guess it was last week or a couple weeks ago. And I was like, okay, all right, we're finally going to get into the season where I can sit outside comfortably with the door open, that kind of season. And Mother Nature quickly came back and said, no, it's still Texas. It's still 90. I hate you. And it wants me to just spend my life sweating. Also, for those of you watching on YouTube, we again have the sun issue beaming through this window. I still have not fixed it, unfortunately. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm sorry. If you're not watching on YouTube, by the way, listening to this podcast, first of all, thank you. We do appreciate that. But also, we do this live every single Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find us. Also, even if you don't want to watch us, which, fair play, understand, Warren Sharp goes live on this feed twice a week on Tuesdays and on Fridays. If you subscribe, you get notified when that happens. I'd really recommend that you do that. So head over there. I'm on Thursday mornings with Rich to do fantasy football. I try to not talk as much as possible so we can hear everything from Rich. So a ton of stuff on this YouTube channel. So make sure you go and check that out. And then also, if you are subscribed to the podcast, thank you. That's awesome. We appreciate that as well. We're going to, talk about a lot of things today. I did want to give, and those of you who may not have listened to the podcast for a very long time, this particular episode, you might not know that Tucker is a Philadelphia, and he's a Philadelphia Eagles fan. Even though he said New Jersey, we're still gonna say Philadelphia Eagles
That's new.
fan.
I just recently got my New Jersey driver's license, and that was tough for me.
It was a tough season.
They didn't
I
even
had
let
a
me keep my
friend.
Pennsylvania one. They confiscated it from me.
I had a friend who went to UT and is a massive Longhorns fan, and his first job right out of school was in Oklahoma. And the day that he had to change his area code to an Oklahoma City area code, like he was actually upset. Like he was actually mad that he had an Oklahoma area code. I go, it's gonna be okay, champ. And he goes, no, it will not. So I understand. But yeah, no. So we have the Philadelphia connection here, and I say unfortunately for me and unfortunately for football fans, maybe not unfortunately for Tucker, it does seem like every indication we get is that we've seen Dak Prescott play football for the last time in 2024, right?
Yeah, it seems like every update it gets worse. It started as it's a hamstring strain, and then it was worse than initially thought. I just pulled up my notes from last week's show. That was what I wrote down, was worse than initially thought. And then it became, probably an IR stint. And now there was a report yesterday that the hamstring's been torn off the bone. And not only is it expected to be an IR stint, but he's probably going to undergo surgery that'll rule him out for the rest of the season. And based kind of on where the Cowboys are right now in the standings and how the first half of the season has gone for them, I don't think it's necessarily worth trying to rush him back, putting him on the IR for 4 weeks and trying to get him back for the stretch run in December. So, yeah, for the most part, I think Dak Prescott's season is done. The Cowboys are pretty much going to kneel on the ball the rest of the season, try and, keep their other star players healthy heading into the offseason. But for all intents and purposes, Dak Prescott's done and the Cowboys season is done.
Yeah, and it was telling that the Cowboys did not put Prescott on injured reserve ahead of this week, because if they had done that, then you get 1 week out of the way. Then they only have 3 more games that they have to get through before he can return. And so if you have like aspirations of him returning this year, then you just go ahead and put him on injured reserve, because it certainly seems like he was going to miss at least multiple weeks in this thing. The fact that they didn't, maybe that initially led to some optimism that maybe this isn't as long term as we thought. But every report we've seen, he's going to see another specialist on Monday. Again, we record this on Monday afternoon, so we don't know what happened with Tyreek Hill's wrist on Monday night, so we can't really discuss that. If there's an injury on Monday night, we don't know that. And then whatever news comes out about Dak with that specialist visit he was supposed to have on Monday, we'll know that. But every sign points to him missing the rest of the season, and this being that. To kind of like on the field with the Cowboys, and I know obviously that Tucker watched that game closely. I'm not breaking news when I say that they were bad on offense on Sunday. It was awful. They had 2.6 yards per play, 0.46 points per drive. I want to give some reference on those numbers. The Browns have been pretty easily the worst offense in the league this season. They are at 4.2 yards per play and 1.27 points per drive. So, well below where the Browns have been all year. That's how bad the Cowboys were. And I see here in the chat, Trey Lance, and I agree with that. They started Cooper Rush. We did get to see Trey Lance at the end. It wasn't pretty when he was on the field. He took 8 dropbacks. He had 2 sacks. 2 of his attempts were off target throws. But at least, Trey Lance is a free agent after this year. You spent a 4th round pick to bring him in. He can at least produce in the running game. He had 17 rushing yards on Sunday, averaged nearly 30 a game in his time with San Francisco. So the Cowboys, I think, have to move on to him, and like you said, kind of reset and see kind of where we go from here. And then from a fantasy perspective, if they do that, then Trey Lance is suddenly interesting in Superflex leagues. I don't know if he's going to be like someone you're interested in even streaming in one quarterback leagues because of volatility of that. But could he be like a poor man's Anthony Richardson, where he produces enough with his legs? Maybe he makes some big plays. They still have CeeDee Lamb, who's still playing, got 35% of the targets or something like that. We would expect that to continue. So there are some interesting things here from a fantasy perspective if they move to Trey Lance. But otherwise, this is just it's a rough situation.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of find yourself in a no-win situation, and it's hard to say that your season is dead on November 11th, but that's pretty much where they are. I mean, their defense has been pretty terrible. They got Micah Parsons back yesterday, and he did normal Micah Parsons things, but when your quarterbacks put up numbers the way they did, and my favorite tweet, I think it was from a Cowboys account, who described their line as Allen Iverson-esque because they were 17 of 29 for 43 yards. I mean, that's like an NBA stat line, right? Yeah, I mean, they're just not moving the ball right now. They can't run the ball. They haven't been able to run the ball all year with, an elderly Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, it's hard to find a positive right now. And CeeDee Lamb is kind of in. I think he had like 6 catches for 20 yards yesterday.
Yeah, he had a target on something like 37% of his routes, and he caught 60% of those targets. And so it wasn't like he just wasn't catching them. And he averaged this off the top of my head, so it's maybe not quite right, but like 0.76 yards per route run, which is a wildly low number to average that per route run, especially when you're getting targeted on over a third of your routes. It's just that's how dysfunctional it was where he was getting the targets. He had like something like 5.5 air yards per target. It just was not working. They have to try something else. On the running game, you mentioned the running game. I thought it was heartening to see that Ezekiel Elliott came back and was, from that suspension, but we still saw Rico Dowdle dominate the work. Now Elliott had that fumble going into the end zone. He wasn't going to make it in the end zone, but like near the goal line, had that fumble that was covered by the Eagles in the end zone. That might have had some effect on it, but Rico Dowdle was pretty clearly, I think, the number one for them. 66% of the running back carries, 14 routes to only 4 for Ezekiel Elliott. So you like that. And if you're looking for positivity for this offense, they have the second easiest remaining schedule of defenses and the easiest remaining against the run. And so if we're going to get a lot more Rico Dowdle, if they kind of lean into that way, then maybe there's some upside there. The downside, though, is that we're going to see a lot of this team on island games moving forward. Obviously, we've got Thanksgiving game. We've got Monday night. This coming up week, they're playing the Texans. We're getting the Battle of Texas on Monday night against the Texans in Dallas. I guess the sun won't be a concern at that time at 7:20 Central Time. That won't be a concern. But yeah, that's kind of where we are with the Cowboys. I promise I'm not like just trying to like beat down on the Cowboys, but it's just such an interesting story based on their expectations this year. And Jerry Jones, like, it's almost in full meltdown at the end of these games, like talking to the media. It's just wild. Like he had one thing about the stadium and about the Sun that felt a lot like, you know how like bad sometimes like abusive moms will say like, well, I guess I'm just a terrible mother if you bring up something like that's like that's.
I believe he said we should just tear down the stadium when asked about the
Yeah,
Sun. He's like, why don't we just tear down the stadium and start over again?
that's exactly what the quote I was talking about. It's just it's strange. I'm sorry, Cowboys fans. I do like y'all. I live amongst a lot of you. I'm sorry for where we are here. We're on to 2025. Another quarterback situation. We're not so certain on this one, missing the rest of the year, but the news around Trevor Lawrence has not been good.
No, it hasn't been positive, and the Jags are obviously falling pretty fast in the standings. There wasn't an update yet on him after he missed yesterday's game with his injury. So we're kind of TBD, sort of wait and see. But you mentioned there were kind of reports towards the end of the week last week that he might need surgery. That might be an option. If he does get surgery, he's done for the year. Maybe the Jags will try to get him back quickly to have him, rehab and play through the stretch run, and then maybe get surgery in the offseason. But yeah, I mean, the more games they lose, the less bright the future looks, or the immediate future looks for this season. So I think the worse they do, the less chance there's a chance he comes back. I mean, they're 2-8 right now. They're, for all intents and purposes, out of a playoff spot. I think probably in the next week or so, kind of like Dak Prescott, they didn't put him on the IR, so it's not like something where they are trying to rush him through 4 weeks and get him back. They're really just playing a wait and see, guessing game at this point. So I would imagine I would lean towards saying he probably hasn't played the rest of the year, but we'll kind of have to wait and see what they decide.
Peterson said they hadn't really had talks about it, which okay, Doug, that seems very unlikely to me. You would say like in a different situation, you might say, well, the coaching staff probably is going to want to force him back to see if they could, get a few wins and save their jobs. But I mean, Peterson at this point you even watch him and he knows what the deal is. Like he knows where all of this is headed. So yeah, this is just a team. It really feels like a team playing out the season. Mac Jones was not good in this game. I will say, I watched the game and I was like, oh, this is not good. And the offense didn't move. And I think ultimately he was not good. But some of the underlying numbers were odd. Like his off target rate was like 9% or something like that, which isn't terrible. So I don't know. But like you watch that game, it wasn't good. It was interesting. He had a 38.1% target share for Evan Ingram. He did not have a particularly high, Mac Jones did not have a particularly high like tight end target share in New England. So it's interesting to kind of see where that goes. And then the saddest thing for me is it appears the Parker Washington dream is dead. I apologize to all of you for trying to get excited about Parker Washington in this game. He gave us one kind of okay game and then an absolute goose egg last week, or in this game against the Vikings. He did play. He was like in on 60% of the snaps, but it wasn't there. We saw Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. be the guys, and I assume we will get more Brian Thomas Jr. as we move forward and he gets healthier. By the way, I assume you don't really have an update on Brian Thomas because he continues to play. We haven't heard any update on that injury, but it doesn't seem like he's been out there, but the targets haven't really been there as much for him. So it's going to be interesting to see with Brian Thomas Jr. kind of how we get through the rest of this season.
Yeah, he mentioned like he's been playing through the chest injury that he suffered a couple weeks ago, but you just kind of look at his target share from when he got hurt to now. I mean, he had 8 targets, dating back to late September, early October, and he hasn't gotten more than 5 targets in the last 4 weeks. Like his kind of participation in that offense has really tapered off, really since his 5 catch for 122 yards that he had against Indianapolis back in week 6 or week 5, whenever that was. It's kind of interesting as to whether, has he fallen out of favor in the offense? Is he not necessarily a huge part of the game plan, or are they kind of trying to save him and keep him healthy and he's playing limited at the moment?
Like I said, though, like his route participation in this game was not limited at all. He ran the same number of routes as Gabe Davis, or right around the same number. So he was basically a full-time player. But yeah, it's an odd situation. Also in the Jaguars, I guess while we're on them, we should talk about Tank Bigsby, who, left that game and then it seems like came back. And I haven't really seen a lot about his ankle injury, but we also didn't see him play a ton in that game. So it's kind of a weird situation.
Yeah, he only got 2 carries. I think I looked it up this morning because we obviously prepare for the show, and I looked up, and there are no updates on him either. The one report I saw said that he was held out of the game plan. He wasn't a part of the game plan because he only got 2 carries. I mean, Travis Etienne did come back this week from his injury, and he really dominated the Lions' work of that work share in the backfield against Minnesota. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that he got hurt early. He returned to the sideline. He was on the sideline. I don't know if he got another carry when he came back. Like I said, he only got 2 carries for 4 yards, but Travis Etienne got 11 carries, and that was it. Mac Jones got 5 carries as well. But yeah, another thing that we kind of have to wait and see on Tank Bigsby, because it seemed like it was kind of minor, and there aren't any reports saying that he's actually hurt, and maybe it was a game plan thing, but it's kind of interesting because he was, really the guy with ETN out. A lot of people thought he would still, have a big part of the offense, and just didn't play.
Yeah, and Etienne was actually, he was back last week too, and then just didn't get a ton of work. Although, I mean, like none of the running backs got a ton of work last week. But Bigsby did have 8 carries to 3 for Etienne in that game against the Eagles. And then this week, as you mentioned it, I mean, Etienne had 29 snaps. There were 10 for Bigsby, 4 for Dearness Johnson. Etienne had 12 touches, 2 for Bigsby, 0 for Dearness Johnson. And then in the second half, Tank Bigsby only had 2 snaps, like in the entirety of the second half. But then you said we didn't hear anything after the game, so it's just an odds decision. What I'll say is this offense is going to be bad the rest of the way. I think that seems very likely. Maybe Lawrence comes back. All the tea leaves suggest that that's not the case, which would suggest this offense isn't going to be very good. But if we get Travis Etienne back to being the clear lead workhorse guy, even in a bad offense, then maybe we're going to get some return on the investment you had, in draft season. It might not matter at this point. Your team might already be out of the playoffs for fantasy. It might not matter enough to kind of get you to that point. And it's probably not going to be what you were expecting when you were drafting him, where you had to draft him in drafts in August. But maybe if we get Etienne back being like this clear workhorse guy, then he can deliver something. If you're someone like me who have him on a pretty good dynasty team and just hasn't been playing him, maybe you get some kind of that kind of bump. So it is an interesting thing. All right, lots of other injuries to get to, lots of other waiver wire to talk about. I do want to stop though and mention that this week, heading into week 11, is our annual free week. Every single year here at Sharp Football Analysis, we do a free week where we give out access to all of our content, Warren Sharp's betting recommendations, Rich Rebar's fantasy football content, which includes his worksheet previews, which is a preview of every single fantasy relevant player in every single game for this week. It is fantastic. Even if you don't play fantasy, even if you're just trying to get him, ready for the betting week, it's got a lot of great stuff in there, both for, sides and totals, but also, for props. We've been doing great on props this year. And part of that is just how that kind of research that Rich does there. You get Rich's DFS picks, Rich's fantasy football rankings, all of that. We can get that with our free week. Now, right now, the free week hasn't been launched when we're recording this. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, you might be able to go to Sharp Football Analysis and find it. If you're listening to us live here, though, or on Monday, afternoon, what you need to do is head over to Sharp Football Analysis and then subscribe to our newsletter, the Sharp Football Analysis newsletter. When you do that, you will get the first notification when free week goes live, how you can sign up, how you access it. I'm telling you, take advantage of this deal, see kind of what we have to offer. Things have been going really well for us this year, and so I think that you'll like it and appreciate it. So remember, free week, head over to Sharp Football Analysis, sign up for the newsletter, get notified whenever free week goes live, and I promise you're going to like it. All right, let's move on to talk about the Bills, which just have these cluster injuries at pass catcher. We had Keon Coleman, has his wrist injury, didn't play in this game. Amari Cooper has his wrist injury, didn't play in this game. And then Dalton Kincaid picked up a knee injury that it seems like they thought he might be able to play through, and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and he even said after the game, he was interviewed, and he said he thought he could play after the game. They put a brace on it at halftime, and then he just couldn't go for whatever reason. It was still sore. So the fact that he was that close to playing, that he thought he was going to be able to play, to me makes it seem like he's probably back. I mean, the Bills have the Chiefs this week, and then a bye, so they have their biggest regular season game of the year, and then a bye following it. So it's kind of an interesting week for them, but Kincaid, I would imagine, is probably going to be okay. That's something to monitor as we head into Wednesday and the first practice report. Keon Coleman and Sean McDermott's already ruled out for this week, so he's going to miss yet another week, but with their bye on the back end, maybe he's back in week 12. Or week 13, right? This is already, we're up to week 11. My goodness, how
we're
time
already there.
flies. It's
We're already there.
unbelievable. So Keon Coleman's already been ruled out this week. They have their bye. Maybe he's back for week 13. And Amari Cooper, who feels like it's been on like the cusp of playing every single week and then it is ruled out in the 11th hour. They said he's still progressing. They haven't ruled him out yet. They're hopeful he can play against Kansas City. But that's TBD. And we've now been burned 2 weeks in a row by thinking Amari Cooper might be healthy, and it turns out he is not.
Yeah, I mean, he's been limited in like every practice for 2 weeks, but it seems like everything you see is that his wrist is pretty heavily, taped up and wrapped up, and that he's not even really catching passes. It seems a lot like these practices are just he's just out there, running against air to learn the offense and stuff like that, which makes you worried about, okay, well, when is this actually going to happen? When are we actually going to see them? As you mentioned, this is a massive game for them this week. This is, they're 5 games up. We'll see what happens on Monday night. There's tons of games up in their division. They're going to win that division going away. But you have this issue with the Chiefs, right? And you want to kind of win, right? You want to win this game. Maybe it doesn't matter if Amari Cooper plays because nothing matters in Kansas City Chiefs games. Whatever happens in the Chiefs games, all I know is that the Chiefs win somehow. That's all that happens in these Chiefs games. So maybe it doesn't matter. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they do with him. For Kincaid, I mean, you expressed some optimism there, and I understand where you're coming from, but I could also see the other side of that argument where he tried to come back and couldn't. Does that suggest that there's something more going on here? This is a more serious injury. He's going to be an interesting one to watch. From a waiver wire perspective, we saw 30 dropbacks without Kincaid on the field. Unsurprisingly, Khalil Shakir dominated the targets, 32% target share, target on 30.8% of his routes. We know who he is. We know he's going to get those targets. We know he's going to probably catch most of them. That's kind of where we are. Mac Hollins was on the field a lot. Again, not surprising. Curtis Samuel was on the field a lot. That is interesting. Samuel is available in a lot of leagues, and he's somebody to pay attention to. And then so far this season, we've seen Dawson Knox have an 80% route participation rate with Kincaid on the sidelines, only a 30% with Kincaid on the field. So Dawson Knox is likely going to, if Kincaid missed time, likely going to run a lot more routes. Only 3 targets last week because that's who Dawson Knox is. He doesn't really command a ton of targets. That's just who he's been as a player. But if you're desperate, it's not a great week for streamers. Maybe that's a guy you go to. But like you said, we still don't even know if Kincaid is going to miss. So it's just a real kind of nebulous situation.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting that Sean McDermott didn't have an update. And I don't even know. I didn't watch his full press conference. I don't even know if he was asked about it. Like I said, Kincaid said after the game that he thought he could run, but didn't feel like he could. I think the term he used was he didn't think he could protect himself out there. So, like you said, it could be something more. It could be something where they thought it was a sprain, and because he was so uncomfortable, maybe they go and do some more imaging today or tomorrow, and we kind of find out. But I think it could be something kind of like A.J. Brown last week when he got hurt. He tried coming back the second half of that game. And just really never got off the sideline and ended up just going right back to the locker room. And then obviously he was healthy and played against the Cowboys on Sunday. So it could be a situation like that, or like you said, it could be something where it's an indication that the injury is a little bit more serious than they initially thought, and they are going to have to take it slow with him.
Yeah, he's one to watch. I think that's the fair one. That I think we're feeling a lot better about is Aaron Jones after kind of what we saw on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you tweet, "Oh God, not Aaron Jones." So I could just imagine you falling to your knees in your house as you watch him get carted off the field.
I want to put this on tape because I want this to be clear to make sure that whatever deities that may or may not exist hear me. If your choices are to take my knee or to take Aaron Jones' knee, take my knee. Take 3 of them. Take as many of my knees as you could find. Keep Aaron Jones healthy at all costs. I love that man. I love watching him play. I may have invested a decent amount of money in him this year. I need Aaron Jones to stay healthy. So yes, it was a tough seeing him on that cart was a tough go for your guy over here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it was just a matter of optics because he's dealing with a rib injury. He described it as a bruised rib injury, and the reason he had to get carted off the field is because the imaging room was nowhere near where their locker room is in that stadium. So it was a matter of convenience. They figured if they carted him to the imaging room, he could get his X-rays and get back on the field a little bit quicker than if they made him walk. So it just looked bad apparently, and he's fine because he came back and he played the rest of the game later in the second half. So I think it's just a matter of soreness, probably limited in practice earlier in the week. He's definitely an older vet, so I think he has kind of earned a rest Wednesday. So maybe rest on Wednesday, limited Thursday, Friday. But I would be surprised if he's out there in week 11.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic he will be playing. That story about why he was on the cart was really funny. I was going to bring it up if you didn't. It was like one of those, well, it's a long way away, so we had to drive over there to get it. I guess this is a good point to mention the whole kind of backup running back situation, because Cam Akers has been playing a lot more than Ty Chandler, and it does certainly seem like Cam Akers is the guy that would be the number 2 if Aaron Jones were to miss time. And overall, kind of last week, it was a big split for Akers overall as well. But in the fourth quarter, Ty Chandler actually played more snaps and had just one fewer touch than Cam Akers. And that was kind of in that time period when Aaron Jones wasn't there. And so that's kind of an interesting idea of, how do they really view this situation? Obviously, I'm still going to view Cam Akers as, the guy you would want if something were to happen to Aaron Jones. If you're interested in kind of putting handcuffs on your bench at this point, as we get through the bye weeks now, if you're kind of interested in doing that, that makes a lot of sense to me, and he's the one I would go with. But it's not as cut or dry as I thought that it was going to be. And so it's just, something to watch there. We do have one question here in the chat I do want to get to. Would you trade Tony Pollard for Calvin Ridley or Ladd McConkey? I don't think I would trade him at this point for Ladd McConkey. I think what we saw from the Chargers offense this week, and it was only 1 week, and we're going to have to continue to play this kind of by ear, but they were 10% under their expected pass rate, which that has not been the trend for them since their bye week. They'd been like 3% over their expected pass rate. So it was an odd game that, they were playing, oddly against the Titans. So it was a bit of an odd, kind of situation there for them. And it wasn't a game where they really had to push it. And so you take a look at that and you say, all right, maybe that's not really how they want to run their offense, and as we move forward, we'll see it a little differently. But I don't know. Would I do it for Ridley? Ultimately, I think I would if you need a wide receiver and don't need a running back. The thing about Tony Pollard, and we were going to talk about Tyjae Spears and the waivers, but we can do it here, is the Titans have pretty consistently said throughout all of the offseason and even throughout this season that they would rather have more of a backfield committee than what we had seen with Tony Pollard. But Tyjae Spears just hasn't been healthy himself, right? And so they haven't been able to do that. And then we saw this week that Tyjae Spears had just 3 fewer snaps than Pollard, 3 fewer touches, 1 fewer route and target. And so you look at all of that and you think to yourself, okay, are we going to actually start to see that split? And if we do, in this offense that we don't particularly think is good, then you would probably rather have the very clear wide receiver 1 in that offense, who has been, a pretty good and solid fantasy asset since the Hopkins trade. And so that's kind of my thinking on that. From just Tyjae Spears as a waiver perspective, himself, he is out there in a lot of leagues. I'll probably cheat and have him in the waiver column this week, even though he doesn't fit my criteria of being available in at least 60% of leagues. He's a little bit over that. I'll probably cheat and put him in there because running backs just kind of been so bad. The problem for Tyjae Spears, even if we expect this to become more of a timeshare, and we know what Tyjae Spears can be, we know how explosive he could be. We saw that at the end of last season. We saw that in this game even. So, we can get a little bit excited about what we might see from him from a big play perspective. You would still expect Tony Pollard to keep that role near the end zone. And, if that continues, and by the way, Spears obviously has missed time, but Spears has played 3 snaps total in goal-to-go situations this season. He has just not been involved in those situations. So if Tony Pollard is keeping those and keeping the better side of the timeshare in an offense that we're probably not that excited to be involved with anyway, then that hurt Tyjae Spears. Is he an ad? Absolutely. If he's available and you have an open spot, running back's been such a wasteland on the waiver wire that, he's certainly someone to kind of go after. But from a perspective of having reasonable expectations, I don't know how high the expectations can be here for Spears, even if, I think that this kind of more of a timeshare is legitimate. So that's where we sit. That's where we sit with Tyjae Spears. Do you have any deep, I know fantasy is not your main focus, any deep Tyjae Spears thoughts, or is this only what fantasy nerds talk about?
No, I don't know what his complete upside is, because you mentioned situationally he doesn't get the goal to go carries. He doesn't put the ball in the end zone, and he's not really a receiving back either. I think he has 15 catches, and Tony Pollard has 36 targets and 24 catches. Tyjae Spears, 15 catches on 15 targets. The guy's a vacuum out of the backfield. But I mean, if he's not more profitable in the passing game, if he's not getting the carries at the goal line, I don't see where you can kind of pick up that value if he's on the field at the same time as Pollard. Like if Tony Pollard gets hurt, certainly he becomes the focal point of that offense. I don't think they're turning it over to Julius Chestnut, who's the third running back on that team. But yeah, I think if Tony Pollard's healthy, Tyjae Spears is certainly worth a roster spot. I don't know where the complete upside is to where if he's only getting 6 or 7 carries or 6 or 7 touches a game, where he can make up the value to make it worth putting him in the lineup.
Yeah, Rich calls those the high cholesterol touches. We want the high cholesterol touches. I try not to call them that because obviously that opens me up to ridicule. But the high cholesterol touches, I actually don't have high cholesterol. Shocking, I know. You should talk to my doctors. They have no idea what the hell's going on with me. But but he calls them that, and that's right. That's what you need if you're not going to be a full. If you're not going to be like a full workload running back, because you don't have a ton of those. If you're going to be Devin Achane or Jahmyr Gibbs, which I'm not saying that Spears is on that level, then you have to at least be getting touches near the goal line. You have to at least be getting catches and finding ways to kind of make up for that otherwise relative lack of targets and lack of touches. And so, yeah, I don't know if Spears is going to get there. And obviously, that's not an offense we want to target. So it's an interesting situation. All right, as we want to talk about Sam LaPorta, picked up a shoulder injury on Sunday night. We had a kind of similar situation with him before with an ankle injury earlier in the season. So it'll be interesting to watch. What do you got on Sam LaPorta?
Yeah, he played through it, and Dan Campbell just actually said during his press conference a couple minutes ago that he's considered day-to-day by the team, which in NFL speak, that's probably the second best thing outside of he's completely healthy day-to-day, probably trends towards him not missing any time. So I think, probably best case scenario for Sam LaPorta, probably don't expect him to miss any time with that shoulder injury.
And also, if we're doing breaking news, and again, we do this on Monday afternoon, we just got news from Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy. He said they are moving forward with Cooper Rush as their starting quarterback. Okay, have fun. I wish y'all the best. If you're in a super flex league, I am still very interested in adding Trey Lance. If you're really needy and you're like, I really need somebody to maybe emerge in this quarterback 2 spot, I'm still going to be interested in Trey Lance kind of in those situations. For LaPorta, with the Lions, they have so many weapons that, and it's not like LaPorta has been great this season, although he did have a great game on Sunday night. Could have been, even better for him. But so it's not like you're really chasing it with guys like Shane Zylstra or Brock Wright or something like that. But I will say that Zylstra had, I feel like I'm not saying that name right, but y'all know who I'm talking about. He actually ran more routes than Brock Wright in the second half on Sunday, if you would like to chase that. And I believe, if I'm remembering my schedule right, that they get the Jaguars this week. And that is about as good of a matchup as you could have for a tight end. So if you're really wanting to chase, that's the information to know there. But, it'll be interesting to watch. Another guy kind of in the same Aaron Jones mold, although maybe there's a little bit more concern about him, is Najee Harris.
Najee.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I got a little lost there.
No, I realized I got to the end of that sentence and realized that I wanted it to be the end and that it didn't sound like the end of the sentence at all. Like my brain just said, all right, you're done talking. And then I go, no, you can't. That's not how that works. You have to cue them and let them know that you're about to talk. So yes. What do you think about Najee Harris? There you go. There's a real question.
Najee Harris, ankle injury. I think he only missed one drive. He sat out one drive, got taped up and then came back in. Latest report this morning was the Steelers said he's going to undergo further imaging to see the severity of that injury. He's missed time, I think, earlier in the season. Pretty much at one point, all 3 of the running backs in the Steelers' backfield were injured between him and Jalen Warren and Cordero Patterson. We're all kind of dealing with something. So they have dealt with this in the past, but I think for the most part, he should be okay. Just kind of got rolled up on in the fourth quarter of that game. So I would probably expect him, based on how the imaging comes out later today, for him to be back this week.
Yeah, I mean, he came back pretty quickly too. It was one of those where we saw it. It was I think it was in the second quarter actually, but we saw it and it kind of didn't look great. And then like they were on the field, I was like, oh, this looks very serious. And then he just kind of popped off and ran off, and like you said, came back. And I'm not going to write about Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren is on way too many rosters to be in my waiver column this week, which by the way, my waiver column goes live on Tuesdays. Make sure you check it out. But I did want to pass along this great note from Ryan Heath of Fantasy Points. Great follow, whatever social media you're on. You should go and follow Ryan. He's a really good follow. 6 of Jaylen Warren's 14 carries came on the drive that Najee Harris missed. So for the rest of that game, that drive aside, Najee Harris out carried Jaylen Warren 21-8. So just kind of something there to remember. All right, I do want to talk a little about Michael Pittman because I think it's an interesting situation given where this Colts season is heading. By the way, Colts going to keep starting Joe Flacco too. Again, interesting decision. We'll see kind of where that goes. But I did have a question in here. What's your view on Deontay Johnson from Jamin? What's your view on Deontay Johnson in the Ravens offense? And I think Donovan also gave a good answer in the chat. He's not getting enough snaps to feel comfortable starting him. I think that's 100% right. What I will say, however, is that what we heard from John Harbaugh after the game, or I think it was even on Monday, actually, that we heard this, where he's saying, he hadn't had a ton of practices, and that's kind of what we saw from him. And so, like, that's why he hadn't been involved. I think that's probably right. I would imagine we're going to continue to see Johnson ramp up as we move through. And obviously, if you're in a position where you can wait on him, if you have a good team that's likely headed in the playoffs, then it'll be interesting to see where we are with Deontay Johnson in 2 or 3 weeks. And so that would be what I'd say about Johnson. You're definitely not starting him kind of in the interim here until we see it and see him get those targets. But yeah, he's a good player. He gets open. He would have had, at least a little bit of a better game if he hadn't slipped down. And so, like, you feel pretty good about that. But yeah, I expect we're going to see his role grow as we get through. All right, let's talk about Pittman. DNP all week with a back and finger injury. It's interesting on Pittman because he's had this back injury for a long time. I mean, you definitely remember we had this time where we thought he was going on injured reserve and he just never did. Now he has the finger injury. He also missed time. He hasn't looked healthy for a while. Like, what are we going to get from him the rest of the season? What are we doing with him? It's just a really odd situation.
It is weird because, like you said, like I remember, I think it was maybe 4 weeks ago, we expected him to go on the IR. We expected him to miss time. And then the Saturday before a game, he had a conversation with his dad, and his dad told him he better go out there and play. So he went out and played, caught a game-winning touchdown, and he's kind of been on the field ever since, but he hasn't really been doing a whole lot. Like, you look at his numbers, his production isn't really there. And I found it funny that they added the finger injury to the injury report this week. And this week was finally the week he was ruled out. And I thought, well, maybe it's because of this finger injury. And now today they're talking about maybe he has to go on the IR because the back is finally given out to the point where he didn't feel comfortable going out and playing. And you mentioned kind of where the Colts are at this season with Joe Flacco. Yeah, you have to wonder kind of not only his ceiling just isn't there, right? Because he's not healthy and he's not really giving you anything, but who knows how much longer they even let him try and go out there and play. So I don't know, maybe they give it another week to see how he responds to treatment and practice and see how it goes from there. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 7 to 8 days he's on the IR and possibly done for the season.
Yeah, I mean, he just hasn't looked healthy. Like, it's really been that simple. He just hasn't looked like Michael Pittman. Like, I think that's fair. Even if you don't think Michael Pittman's anything more than, just a solid, number one back end number one kind of wide receiver, maybe in that kind of like in the middle of the number one and number two on a good team, he is still a pretty good wide receiver, and he just hasn't looked like that. He hasn't looked like that for a while. Without Pittman, obviously Josh Downs is the guy. Although, and we talked about this on the Thursday show with Rich when we were talking about Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs is kind of in that odd area in which he is clearly their number one receiver. He's clearly going to get targets when he's on the field, maybe even to the detriment of the offense, because it seemed like some of those Joe Flacco interceptions, he was just locked in on Downs and was just going to throw it to him, no matter what. But, he's clearly their number one option, but he's also only on the field for about 70% of dropbacks, only running a route on about 70% of dropbacks. So it's kind of that odd situation because he is primarily playing in the slot. So it's an interesting thing. Like I said, it's a lot. It's very similar to kind of what we're seeing with Shakir in Buffalo. The full-time players on this offense, at least, this last week with Pittman out, was Alex Pierce and A.D. Mitchell. Pierce had 7 targets. He had 4 for 81 and a touchdown, although that touchdown was the most garbage time touchdown we've seen this year, maybe. Like, it was 2 seconds left on the clock in a game that was over. So, it is what it is. But Alex Pierce got those 7 targets, was on the field a lot. You like to see that for the player that Pierce is, because, like, that's the thing with Pierce. If he's only getting 3 or 4 targets, you're saying, well, he's going to have to hit a long one to hit. If he's actually going to be getting 7 or 8 targets, then it's a bit of a different conversations. We also had A.D. Mitchell, obviously the rookie, 6 targets, 6 for 71. I'm really interested to see where we go from this. I think both are definitely adds. Both are worth adding with this kind of Pittman situation. I kind of think we know who Alex Pierce is. I am going to be at least a little bit surprised if we see this target share continue. Maybe it is who he is now. Maybe he's going to get these targets. He is a young player still. He is still developing. So I'm not saying that definitely can't happen. But I think that A.D. Mitchell is very talented. He's a player that I personally like a lot. And so I'm very interested in him on this waiver wire. If he's going to be a full-time player, I think he can command those targets. And so I'm very interested in him, but I think both of them are definitely adds given kind of where we are. You do have the other aspect of it, though. They're going to start Joe Flacco again this week. At least I believe that's what Shane Steichen said on Monday. But you have to imagine, if we continue down the path that we're on now, that we're going to get Anthony Richardson again. And if we get Anthony Richardson again, what happens to this offense? Are we back to 20 dropbacks and you hope that Alex Pierce just happens to catch a touchdown? Maybe that happens. So those are the things we have to think about if we're thinking about how aggressive we're going to be on kind of anybody in this passing game.
Yeah, and it's just tough for, especially someone like Pierce, who you mentioned. It's just such a high variance player, right? We remember, he had a big week 1. He had 125 yards. He had a huge game against Jacksonville, where he put up, I think, like 130. And then obviously he had 5 catches or 4 catches on Sunday. And that's the most he's had all year since like week 2. Like, he has never been a high volume guy, which from a fantasy perspective just makes it such a huge variable, because if he doesn't get a touchdown, if he doesn't get in the end zone, if he doesn't pop off for 60 yards, I mean, his kind of floor is, 2 catches for 15 yards, 1 catch for 9 yards, 3 catches for 40 yards. I mean, you could have a week where he puts up, 22 points based on, a 65-yard touchdown, or you can put up 5 because that deep ball they tried in the second quarter didn't hit. So it's tough to bank on a player like him, even if he does become, more of a high volume guy with Pittman out. It's just a player kind of his style is tough to really, really hit on or count on a week to week basis, just knowing kind of how low his target share is going to be.
But that's the thing. If he's getting more opportunities at those big plays, then suddenly you feel a lot more comfortable with it. So it is an interesting situation for them. And if we're talking about, by the way, high variance players, this is a perfect segue into Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who at this time last week, Tucker and I had forgotten had joined the Saints. We watched him play in that game and forgotten that he had joined the team. He comes out this week. He caught all 3 of his targets, so he got there on 3 targets, had a massive game. What I'll tell you about MVS is this feels like, I've been doing this for a long time on the waiver wire, way back to my Roto World days. This feels like a classic waiver wire trap. Like, this feels like an absolute classic one. Bad offense, got there on 3 targets, caught all 3 of them despite having 29 average air yards per target, so way down the field, caught all 3 of them. He's consistently been inconsistent, even in good offenses, which again, he doesn't have one here. This feels like a classic waiver wire trap that I'm going to let somebody else pay more for him, trying to catch that lightning in a bottle. But there are targets available in this offense. There's targets available at wide receiver. We saw kind of the receivers they were rolling out there, with Chris Olave now joining Rashid Shaheed on IR. It doesn't seem like it's going to work out for Mason Tipton, as I at least had hoped that it might work out. So there's at least opportunity here. Maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, but I don't have a lot of confidence. I will say, I'm going to pick, now that Mason Tipton, now that dream is dead, I'm going to pick a new super deep league fixation in this receiver core, and that is Kevin Austin Jr., which, full disclosure, I have had him on dynasty rosters before, so this is a guy that I liked. If you go back to the combine when he was there, I think in 2021, maybe 2022, he was 6'2", 200, 4'4", 340, 39-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump, 6'7", 3-cone, which for him is great, 9.94 relative athletic score, ran 50% of the routes in week 10, only had 1 fewer target than MVS, if you're in super deep leagues, I don't know. Sometimes, if you just have these super athletic guys, sometimes it works out for them. So we'll see. But I think that's where we are. It is funny to go straight from Alex Pierce to talking about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. It feels like we're right in that pocket, right in that zone, Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I think we brought him up last week, just kind of as a joke in passing, like, oh, go pick up that guy, and I hope you did, and I hope you started him, and I hope you won your game because of it. I hope you won your matchup because we told you to go pick up Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and you didn't pick up on the sarcasm that those comments were tripping with. But yeah, I mean, it's just I think we've reached a point in the season, especially in the fantasy calendar, where people might be desperate, where maybe the waiver wire has gotten to the point where it's so dry that any kind of glimmer of hope people are going to be fighting over. And we've just seen this before with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Like, we've seen him have games like this. This is what he's been through his 6 or 7 years in the NFL, dating back to his time in Green Bay. I think it's okay to maybe sit this one out. And maybe, if you're spending money on the waiver wire, try to spend it on something that maybe is a little bit more reliable.
Question from Donovan: isn't it Calvin Austin? It's a very fair question, Donovan. I think that it's a very fair question. No, but I am talking about a different player, Calvin Austin on the Steelers, and I'm talking about Kevin Austin on the Saints. But it's such a fair question because nobody knows. That was Kevin Austin's first game in the NFL, I believe. He maybe played with Birmingham. I forget. He did play in one of those other leagues, or maybe he's in the CFL. I forget. But it is a very fair question, Donovan. You are in the right to ask that question. I'm on your side here. A couple other ones, as we're talking about wide receivers kind of getting their unlimited targets. Mike Williams. Here's what I'll say about Mike Williams. Mike Williams, if we're logging week 10 touchdowns, the scoreboard is Mike Williams 1, New York Jets 0. So congratulations, Mike Williams, on that touchdown. He ran 7 total routes, had 1 target. Again, it happened to be a touchdown. I still have a lot of concerns about where the targets come from in this offense, how quickly they show up for Mike Williams. You would expect, I think, him to take more on that Van Jefferson role, other than, by the way, that Calvin Austin role. So, hey, look, a nice segue there with Calvin Austin and kind of where he's playing and where he's earning targets. I think you would expect Mike Williams, obviously, to be more in that kind of Van Jefferson role. Since Russell Wilson has taken over, Van Jefferson has 3, 5, and 2 targets. Williams, I think, is a better player, even this kind of version of Williams that we don't know how healthy he still is coming back from another serious injury. I think he's a better player than Van Jefferson. He could take on more of those targets, steal some of those looks from Calvin Austin, even if he's not playing in a similar role. So there is definitely a path here for Mike Williams. So I'm not saying that he's definitely going to be in the column. I get it. But, I think also we should have some trepidation with him and kind of ultimately where we get from here, especially since it's very clear that George Pickens, if you just give him targets and he's engaged, is a very good wide receiver, is going to make plays. And we've seen him kind of consistently do that with Russell Wilson. So those are my concerns. What I will say, though, is the Steelers have the 4th easiest passing schedule left, thanks in large part, and this is a very surprising thing to say about this division, thanks in large part because they have to still play every single team in their division twice. So that's where the Steelers are kind of heading into the back half of the season. So there's some interesting stuff there. And then one more waiver before we get out of here. We talked about him last week. We mentioned him last week. I hope you went and picked him up last week, and that's Audric Estime. Sean Payton said he would be more involved. I did have some pessimism about that because Sean Payton lies, and there we go. But he was definitely more involved. 82.4% of the running back carries, 25 snaps for Estime to 16 for Javonte Williams and 6 for Jaleel McLaughlin. So we saw Estime get that work. He does still have the concerns about how much he'll be used in the passing game. He ran 1 fewer route than Javonte Williams, despite playing that many more snaps than him. He did play 5 third down snaps. That's promising. That's a good thing for Estime. Maybe we're going to still see him kind of get involved there. But, I think that Estime is the most exciting true waiver wire running back we've had in a while, which saying a lot about kind of the waiver wire situation of running back of late. But I do think he might just kind of be the starter in Denver moving forward. We've seen the Denver offense be better than we expected them to be. So there's a lot of positive things for Estime. Like I said, I hope you picked him up last week. He's going to definitely cost more this week, but he's still somebody I think is an ad for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a kind of an area of opportunity this late in the season that's fairly rare. But you look at what everyone else has done on that team. Javonte Williams is their leading rushers, averaging like 3.8 yards per carry. He really hasn't been great since he tore his ACL a couple of years ago. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, who's kind of in their number 2 guy, hasn't really put it all together either. So as they kind of pull out these games, they're 5-5. They're certainly in the middle of a playoff hunt, searching for some kind of offensive identity. I think they're 28th in first downs this year, so they aren't exactly moving the ball with great efficiency. You have a rookie quarterback who's desperate for some help and for some easy yardage. I think if Estime can do that, he becomes a big part of this offense moving forward. And I haven't looked at their schedule to see who they necessarily have if it's a favorable matchup. But if you're someone who's in desperate need of a running back, it seems like this guy's going to kind of come out of nowhere and actually get a decent target share, which is nice to see.
Yeah, they're home actually against Atlanta this week, and so it'll be interesting to see kind of where we go from here. About Javonte Williams, you mentioned the injury. That knee injury took something special away from us because Javonte Williams. I know we've seen the last 2 years. Go back before that with Javonte Williams. Go back to Javonte Williams in college too. That injury was it's upsetting. It took something really really special from us, and so all the best to Javonte Williams. I hope he finds it again because I really liked watching him as a player. All right. That's it for us. We got to get out of here. We've been talking too long already. Again, we really appreciate everybody listening to us live on YouTube. We appreciate that. Remember, if you're not, go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find it. Subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live. Again, Warren Sharp will be live on Tuesday and Friday. I'll be back with Rich Rebar on Thursday. So a lot of stuff happening. If you're listening to us via the podcast, please subscribe there as well. We appreciate that. And remember to head over to Sharp Football Analysis, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get notified when we go live with free week this week, week 11. We're going to have access to all of Rich Rebar's fantasy content, all of Warren Sharp's betting recommendations for the NFL. All of that's going to be available as part of that free week. You're going to want access to that if you're not already subscribed. So make sure you go and check that out. And Tucker and I will be back to talk with you next week.